I want to get into this story about Joe Biden comparison to LBJ. Now, I know, like, we often hear people compare Joe Biden to FDR, which I said this multiple times. Joe Biden is no FDR. FDR had his flaws as well, but Joe Biden is no FDR. But people keep making this comparison, right? But this one in particular, and shout out to Case Study QB for catching this. This one is actually comparing some of the issues with Joe Biden's presidency to LBJ's presidency. So we have to remember with Lyndon B. Johnson, it's a little bit of a different situation because obviously he stepped in after JFK was assassinated. Joe Biden, however, was elected by the people, right? But there are some similarities. I want to go ahead and get into this clip here from Case Study QB. Thank you so much, Case. Discussing the parallels between LBJ and Joe Biden. This includes the war in Vietnam and the war with Israel and Gaza. Let's dive in.
There are many parallels in the political careers and administrations of our 36th president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, and our 46th, Joe Biden. Both were elected to serve in Washington at a young age and rose to become influential senators, with Johnson becoming majority leader and Biden chairing important committees, Senate Judiciary and Foreign Relations. Both served as vice presidents to young, charismatic former political rivals from a new generation in politics, John F. Kennedy and Barack Obama. Obviously, their paths to the presidency were very different, but once in office, as we so frequently say, history rhymed. Both pursued ambitious domestic agendas, completing the civil rights agenda started under JFK and launching the Great Society social agenda in Johnson's first 2 years, and big economic items like the infrastructure law for President Biden. Now, as we enter President Biden's re-election year, the parallels to Lyndon Johnson's 1968 start to pop up again. Take the prospective Republican opponent, a paranoid, written-off political loser trying to make a comeback, presumably so he can abuse presidential power. After all, Trump has already borrowed Richard Nixon's Southern strategy, which has become Republican dogma since 1968.
So it's interesting that they're comparing Richard Nixon to Donald Trump. There may be some similarities, but one of the things I do want to point out, which they wouldn't have called it progressive at that point in time, I guess, because Richard Nixon was a Republican. But there were some policies that Richard Nixon actually favored that we consider to be progressive, whereas I didn't see that so much with Donald Trump. So just keep that in mind.
And heavily recycled his racist, fear-mongering law and order rhetoric for 2 elections now. On the Democratic side, it's not a mirror image of 1968, but there are some eerie parallels. A Minnesota Democrat challenging the incumbent president, a Democratic convention in Chicago this summer. There's even a Robert F. Kennedy in the race, just like in 1968. But none of that touches the most glaring parallel, an overseas war, albeit with some major differences. For Lyndon Johnson, 1968 meant Vietnam. The escalation of that war brought protests from all over, peace activists, civil rights organizations, and leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr.
Let's pause here for a second because we enter Vietnam. What I think we have to remember, Vietnam, this was the last war that actually showed the American people the casualties of civilians on network television. This is why you didn't see that anymore after that, right? So Americans were actually at home, the ones who were not obviously involved in the war, they were able to turn on to the television and see these kids, these mothers, civilians just trying to go about their usual lives blown up during the wars. And, you know, so we didn't see this with my generation. Like, I didn't see civilian casualties on network television with the war in Iraq or Afghanistan. We didn't see any of those things. But one thing that is a little bit different is that now, because of social media and thanks to platforms like Twitter/X, whatever we're calling it, we have been able to still see those images from Gaza of the civilian casualties because of the investigative journalists in Gaza. So we didn't see it on network television, but we have seen it on social media. So social media has found a way to go around that other media apparatus and to still have us see what is actually happening over there. So you have to remember, when the war in Iraq started, there was no social media, right? So just keep that in mind. So this is one of the similarities between the war in Vietnam and the war with Israel and Gaza, the fact that we are able to see the civilian casualties. And that does bear a lot of weight on the people. This is one of the reasons why I've said before why the protests against the war in Gaza have been so huge internationally all across the world, because if we had not been able to see the video footage, I don't think that those protests would have been as large as they are. And they're still continuing. Same thing with the war in Vietnam. When people were able to see those images on the television screen, of course, a lot of people are going to be outraged, like, whoa, what is happening here? I thought they were doing combat to combat. They're out there killing children, and I'm seeing it on the screen. That is why, after that war, mainstream media decided not to show civilian casualties on network television. So keep that in mind. War in Vietnam also had large protests.
Young people and students, many of whom faced the prospect of being drafted to fight and die halfway across the globe. Ultimately, Johnson decided not to run for president again.
One difference between the two, obviously, the war in Vietnam implemented the draft. And I haven't really seen that in play during my lifetime. But now you have an added layer to this, right? Because you have Americans being forced to fight for their country against their will. Some people volunteered, a lot of people didn't. So the draft added an extra layer of resentment in reference to that war in particular.
For Joe Biden, who is seeking a second term, it's American support and financial backing of Israel's ongoing war against Hamas, in which more than 24,000 people have been killed in Gaza since the war began, including more than 10,000 children. There are no American forces on the ground in this war and no draft, but it is backed by billions of American taxpayer dollars and perpetrated with the help of American 2,000-pound bombs.
And let's also remember, when we talk about the protest, heavy protest on college campuses for both conflicts, Gaza and Vietnam, right? So the way that we see pundits and a lot of the Zionists coming after the protests at the student camp, at the college campuses, just remember, when we look back at the war in Vietnam, there were a lot of protests at college campuses back then as well. So just be mindful of that. This is why it's important to go back and revisit history.
And it's causing a new generation of young people to turn against a Democratic president over a war they object to, with some even weighing sitting out this election rather than choosing between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Back with me is Jelani Cobb. And, you know, Jelani, I want to read to you something that Nida Khan, who's a guest on the show in the past, has said on Medium. And she says it's called 100 Days of Hell in Gaza. And she points out all of us live in a far more interconnected world as compared to the past. Young people, especially so, virtually everyone has access to reports, videos, images, et cetera, from the ground in an instant, thanks to the advent of social media and the online sphere. In short, Palestinians have been humanized, their voices heard, their plight visible for all who want to see, despite the extreme control of information in traditional outlets. We don't need a Walter Cronkite to tell us what this war is. People can see it. That is a huge difference from that era.
It's a huge difference. And, you know, I think there are a couple of, obviously, there's a very big difference between the Robert Kennedy that was in the
It's a whole different kind of Kennedy.
Very different one, too. I also think one other key difference is that, you know, we lose sight of the fact that people actually thought of Richard Nixon as comparatively moderate. Because remember in 1968, when he gets the nomination, the previous person was Barry Goldwater.
Right. You're right.
And so they actually could pass Nixon off as a kind of moderating figure in Republican politics. That's not the case with Donald Trump. And so, you know,
That's why I was surprised they tried to compare Richard Nixon to Donald Trump, because I don't see those similarities.
Huge polarizing figure, but I would say that, Nixon and Trump have in common having lost a presidential election prior to this.
And they're criminous. The criminess is kind of similar.
That too, right?
There's that too. And the other piece is the Minnesota is very different. I mean, Dean Phillips has no shot. He's not on the ballots anywhere. He has promised that in a Phillips administration, he would hire Elon Musk and Bill Ackman, the guy who chased Claudine Gay out of the Harvard presidency. So he's setting a tone, which I don't think is.
Let me tell you something really quick about Dean Phillips as well. Dean Phillips is now being backed by Andrew Yang. Not just Bill Ackman, who's a billionaire. Bill Ackman also donated money to his campaign, but Bill Ackman also donated money to RFK too. So he all over the place, okay? He's all over the place. But Andrew Yang has publicly come out in support of Dean Phillips. It's really odd, this one. This is the same guy who called Crystal and Kyle anti-Semitic, by the way. This guy right here. He's supposed to be the alternative to Joe Biden.
Going to help with Democrats.
Yeah, I don't think that that's going to win any votes necessarily.
No, not at all. I mean, for Biden, though, to talk about sort of where he stands. I mean, he has this war. He's got a passionate, affiliation and love for Israel, and he's going to stick with it. He's not going to change his policy, but he does have this problem. I mean, he's going to Michigan soon. It's not clear Arab American leaders are going to meet with him when he gets there. He's going to meet with them. Some are being like, I don't even want to. How do you think he is navigating this? And do you think he is navigating it, or do you think he's sort of putting it aside?
Yeah.
And breaking news, since we're bringing in Michigan, I can talk more about this on Sunday, but I don't know if you guys have seen the polls, but Jill Stein is now polling 6% in Michigan. So there's that. Good luck, Biden. Good luck. 6%, and it's only January. So good luck with that.
I mean, it's a very difficult position, and it's one of the things that people have noted about, one reason why the Democratic Party hasn't polarized in the same way that the Republican Party is because of the diversity of interests in it. The fact that you have, in Michigan, lots of Democrats who are Arab American, and you have lots of Jewish Americans who vote Democratic. And so, it is the complexity of the high wire act that he has to do. That's the nature of the Democratic Party. Now, if we also wanted to carry that 1968 analogy forward, Humphrey inherited, the fact that LBJ stepped aside didn't mean that those problems went away.
Right.
And even LBJ had his own misgivings about Humphrey, about whether or not he would withdraw from Vietnam.
Right.
And so, he essentially inherited the problems that were at LBJ's doorstep.
So you see what he's trying to do here? He's basically, this is kind of pandering to the younger kids who don't want to support Biden this time around. He's basically trying to assure the younger voters who are against Joe Biden because of his support for genocide in Gaza that, well, guys, even if Joe Biden steps aside, that doesn't mean anything's going to change in reference to Gaza. So you might as well just still vote for Joe Biden. That's what he's trying to do. And so originally with this segment, when I first started watching it, they tried to make it seem like this is just going to be a history lesson and we're making this comparison. But at the end, you see the ultimate goal is to convince those voters, those young people out there protesting, that you should still support Joe Biden anyway, because there's no guarantee something's going to change if he were to step aside in reference to Gaza at all. But that's not the point. The point is, we should not, especially for those who say they're progressive. I see this as a humanitarian issue. I see this as a human rights issue. So I personally would not be supporting any candidate that is supporting this war. That's just me. I can't speak for everybody else. But it's like all of a sudden, Put your morals aside, because let's be clear, folks. If it were the other way around, if Donald Trump was president right now and he was the one who was actually sending the weapons to Israel to commit the genocide, this man sitting right here and Joy Reid would be saying something different. They would be calling on those voters to vote against him. They would say voting for Donald Trump would be voting for genocide. Let's think about this. Let's go back to the Muslim ban and let's remember how they reacted then. But because it's happening under the Democratic Party and this particular network is supposed to be supportive of the Democratic Party, they are going to make up as many excuses as they can for Joe Biden. They are going to continue to fearmonger the American people and tell you to vote for him anyway. But like I said, and I stand by this, even when you look at the policing issues, George Floyd happened under Donald Trump's presidency. A lot of people came out into the streets, historic numbers in reference to protests. But the moment that Donald Trump lost, most of the protesters went back home. And that was when it hit me. I said, we messed up here somewhere. Because somewhere along the way, during all these protests, somehow most of the protesters seemed to believe that police brutality was only an issue under Donald Trump. And that it only happened because of the Republican presidency. A lot of those people not even realizing this has been going on for decades. The number of people that you met at George Floyd protests that told you they had never even seen anything like that before. Some of us know differently. So when all those protesters went home, I said, something went wrong here, because they believe that because the president that is coming in is going to be a Democrat and Trump is gone, that the issue of police brutality is no longer going to be a problem. We messed up somewhere. Somewhere that was a mess up. And how easily they forgot that the Ferguson protest happened under Barack Obama. Barack Obama militarized the police and brought them into Ferguson. How quickly people forgot. This is why when Michael Brown was shot, when there were the Ferguson protests, this is why the protests, there weren't as many people out in the streets. Part of that was because of the fact that people were still willing to give Barack Obama the benefit of the doubt. One, because he was a Democrat, and two, because they said, well, it's a black guy. He's trying to do the best that he can. He couldn't mean any intentional harm as he militarizes the police. How quickly people forgot. So let's flip the script, people, and let's be clear with ourselves. If it were Donald Trump in office right now, and this genocide was happening under Donald Trump, they would tell you not to support him. Now you take away the parties. Pretend there are no political parties. And just focus on the actions, the behavior, and think about your own morals.
To the people who are thinking, well, maybe if President Biden decides he's going to step aside, there'll be some other Democrat that will, they will inherit the same sort of conundrum.
Well, and then the other difference is.
So you see that? You see what he's doing? They will inherit this. Yes, they will. But guys, that happens with every presidency. Every time a new president is elected, they inherit what was there prior to their presidency. It's always been that way.
Because although Richard Nixon was a crimey individual, when it came down to it, he stepped down. Right. He was willing to put American democracy before his own self-interest, and part of his self-interest was getting pardoned, which he did get. But I mean, if Donald Trump were to be the Richard Nixon and win in 2024, he ain't going nowhere. There's a good chance he just stays in office. And who in the Republican Party going to check him? But there's no one there who even has the strength. Ted Cruz is falling down on his knees. They're all on their knees.
So let me point something out here. Let me show you how the game has been revealed. So she's telling you that if Donald Trump wins in 2024, no one is going to check him. Who's checking Joe Biden? because the squad members aren't checking him. They're telling you they're going to support him. Who's checking him? Kamala Harris isn't checking Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders barely tries to check Joe Biden, not the way that he should. Who's checking him? Obviously, no one, if Joe Biden is continuing to do whatever he wants to do. The majority of American voters, the majority of American Democrats are against this war in Gaza. They're against the genocide, and they want a permanent ceasefire. Ceasefire is the bare minimum. And the president pretends like it's not even happening. Remember what I told you? I played that clip from Democracy Now!, where that gentleman said the Biden administration did not expect the response it is receiving in reference to this war. They don't know how to handle it.
Who would even tell him you have to get out of office?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it and you listen to, like what Bob Woodward has said about this and, what Carl Bernstein has said about this, we're both saying that, even in Trump's administration from 2016 to 2020, he far exceeded the level of just audacity that Richard Nixon could ever muster. The things far exceeded the alarming nature of what we saw in Watergate.
Yeah.
And so, that's not, I think a possibility.
Yeah, this is where the parallels go completely awry and askew because Trump ain't no Richard Nixon. And we wish he was Richard Nixon at this point. Jelani Cobb, it's always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Did you hear that? We wish he was Richard Nixon at this point. They would be fine with the conservative. They just don't want one that the status quo does not approve of. Did you catch that? I told you, they just want to maintain the status quo. Someone who does not want to maintain the status quo and gave a very, very powerful speech in reference to Israel and Gaza. Mark Lamont Hill, if you haven't seen this, you're going to hear it right now. Because what Mark Lamont Hill says in this church is exactly the way the people who were a part of the congregation should have responded to the fact that Joe Biden, who is actively committing genocide against the Palestinian people, the fact that he could show his damn face in a black church where 9 black people were gunned down. The fact that he can show his face there after he was friends with all these segregationists, he was friends with Strom Thurmond, he was friends with Byrd. And this is the person that they're supposed to listen to? Listen to this from Mark Lamont Hill. Because see, people like Joy Reid, they want you to not focus on these types of things. They still want you to come out and support Joe Biden. And because Joe Biden is doing so poorly and is struggling to talk oftentimes, they're even leaning towards settling for Nikki Haley. That's how desperate these people are to keep the status quo. They don't want anything different. They don't want any change. But Mark Lamont Hill does. Listen to this powerful speech. Last Sunday, St. Sabina Church welcomed me to deliver their annual MLK Day message. Listen to what Mark Lamont Hill says. This is probably one of the highlights of the speech. This has gone pretty viral on Twitter. Listen to this.
Right. So the AME Church is a church of struggle. And it's also a church of tragedy. We know that Dylan Roof went into that church and killed 9 beloved saints as they were praying. So I was a bit struck last week when I saw that they opened the pulpit up to Genocide Joe. Y'all can get mad, I don't care. And people, as he began to give his campaign speech, some protesters stood up and said, "Stop the blood in Palestine." They said, if you're outraged by the blood of Selma and you're outraged by the blood that was spilled in this very church, then how about calling for a ceasefire in Palestine since you've given them the weapons, you giving them the support, you giving them the money? Joe, why don't you do something about it? They marched and stood up and got kicked out of the church, and people said, we're outraged. You know, I was outraged too. How dare you use this sacred space? How dare you use this beloved pulpit? How dare you use this sacred tradition? How dare you use the words of Jesus, who overturned the tables in the temple, who was committed to overturning a Roman government, who was committed to speaking out against injustice? How dare you use this space as a shield for imperial war? How dare you use this space as a shield for violence? How dare you use this space as a shield for genocide?
Now, I don't know if Mark Lamont Hill has any preaching experience in his background, but he really lit this on fire. They literally let a segregationist, crime bill, genocide Joe walk down the aisle of the church, stand up in the pulpit, and start to beg for votes. Come out and support me. Genocide Joe. And you literally had people in the audience chanting 4 more years. And what kills me is when you saw black people doing it. Now, Marcel Dixon was just here a minute ago. He said some of those people were brought in. You really got people in my own damn community willing to sell out for this racist, segregationist, genocidal maniac. It's a damn shame. It's a damn shame when you sit up there and you see people who have been oppressed support and cheer on an oppressor. What did we come to in this country? What did we come to? What the fuck is wrong with people? And not just the black church, but the black community in general. Malcolm X warned you about this. Malcolm X told you if you are not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and supporting the people who are the oppressor. And that is exactly what has been happening. All because Trump bad, orange man derangement syndrome. So it kills me, it bothers me to see my own people, you up there cheering for this man who sat up there and he wrote all these damn bills to take black men out the home, giving them harsher penalties. The crime bills. There were multiple crime bills, not just one. You sit up there and you cheer on this man. He apologizes to Anita Hill when he decides to run for president in 2020. But all those damn years went by and you ain't say nothing to Anita. They cheer for this man who refused to let her witnesses testify to protect Clarence Thomas. And the black community, just nothing. No pushback. No, get out of here, Joe. They show up and want to take selfies. It's clown behavior. It really is. And like I said, it's gotten to the point where we're settled for anything and accept anything. I know Joe Biden hasn't done anything for the black community. I know he made promises and sold us out, but I got a selfie with him. Listen to the rest of it.
The moral atrocity that took place wasn't some disruptive protesters. It was the fact that you allowed the leader of the most violent and bloody empire in modern history to stand in this place and represent a tradition that he ain't got nothing to do with. How dare you?
The biggest mistake was inviting Joe to the cookout. The same guy who sat up there and told Charlemagne the God, you ain't black if you can't figure out whether or not you're going to vote for me or Donald Trump. The things that we have allowed, we've allowed people just get away with. Just get away with. No other community puts up with this. Did you see The Muslim voters decided to get together in Michigan and they said, you know what? We're not going to support you, Joe Biden, because of what you're doing to people in Gaza. No other group puts up with this. Asian Americans wouldn't put up with this. Latino Americans wouldn't put up with this. The Muslim Americans ain't putting up with this. Things need to change. Things really need to change. So when you think about that comparison between Joe Biden and LBJ, and you think about these two wars, I want you to remember that come November, the things that were just said, don't let people guilt trip you to go and support Joe Biden. Don't make people feel like it's your duty to support the Democratic Party. It's not. I'd rather have a vote of morality and vote with my conscience than to vote just to make sure that Democrat establishment types are okay with me. That's the way I see it. He should have never been in that church in the first damn place. He should have never been there. Never been there. And I challenge anyone to that discussion. And for Jim Clyburn to sit there next to him, the nerve, the audacity